ballistic missiles, attack drones. Unfortunately, we have got losses, destruction, the capital in other localities in all of the regions of Ukraine.
Pretoria is one of the capitals that can still access Russia and Ukraine for talks as the war continues. Zelensky has also pleaded with South Africa to engage with Moscow to bring back their children.
What we should focus on is that there is a willingness and a commitment from Ukraine for an unconditional ceasefire. An unconditional ceasefire sets a very good and positive tone to negotiations to commence. It is a confidence-building measure that should be a key ingredient in a negotiation process. So I see this as a great progress.
The U.S. has been involved with Ukraine and Russia to end the conflict. One of the major issues is around the preconditions after Russia annexed some Ukrainian territories, including Crimea. President Ramaphosa says there should be no preconditions in the peace deal that will be negotiated between Russia and Ukraine. Zelensky says that they want a ceasefire without conditions.
Fight for our independence, for our sovereignty, for our territorial integrity. It's about actually our survival. And we are completely straight and transparent on that. I do not see any specific particular pressure on Russia. I don't hear of any new dedicated sanction packages against the Russian Federation. Maybe it's for the time being.
The two leaders also held discussions on boosting trade and investment opportunities in their respective countries, including areas of cooperation on agriculture. Amdi Tabasoteti, SABC News.
And now let's see what else is making news on the continent. We've been talking about the trade tiff, as it were, between China and the United States. But, well, you wouldn't know this, but there is one that exists now between Tanzania, Malawi and South Africa. Tanzania has officially imposed a trade ban on food and agricultural products from Malawi, intensifying a diplomatic and economic standoff that began with trade restrictions on Tanzanian produce by the two nations. A similar ban has also been imposed on any agricultural products from South Africa into the Tanzanian market. Tabile Nkunjana, a senior agricultural economist with the National Agricultural Marketing Council's Trade Research Unit, joins us now. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Good evening to you, Tsepiso, and of course, Channel Africa News listeners. Thanks for having me.
So we've been looking at this tit-for-tat game between the United States and other countries around the globe, but never did we imagine that the same kind of thing is happening here on the continent. Can it be characterized in that same way?
Absolutely, Tsepiso, because the thing is, Africa, it has had these issues, and part of the reasons Africa has not, managed to integrate in terms of trade regionally, it is partly because of the issues that are related to some unnecessary trade restrictions that two countries in Africa impose on one another. We've been talking about this, for instance, within the SACU bloc, which is one of the oldest in the world, customs that we have been saying, this actually hinders the growth that we'll learn to see across the countries, because the reality is that when you're trading with countries, it does not only positively affect the generally trade itself, it affects the development of the countries. And this is something that, if you want to see an example, look at how the European Union has developed. Part of that is because they have made sure that they are trading with one another in a way that is benefiting one another. As a result, that continent or that union has grown tremendously. And Africa, it is one of the reasons it remains one of the least developed countries with a lot of food security and, of course, an ability to feed itself at one way or the another.
So what is the genesis of this tiff, given the fact that we saw Tanzania's agriculture minister, Mr. Hussein Bashe, issue a 7-day ultimatum? Were there no talks, no moves to improve the tensions over these reciprocal bans?
For instance, if to respond now on the standing point of it as someone that is in South Africa, and of course we do follow everything that is happening within the continent. We saw this as an unexpected thing, specifically for South Africa, because for one, when Minister, the his honorable from Tanzania mentioned that he was to put bans on Malawi and South Africa. For us, it was a surprise because for one, if you had to look, for instance, for the products that he is quoting as being banned to enter Malawi, it's a couple of them compared to only one product that he is referring to South Africa. That's one. And number two, if we had to look into generally how South Africa has been trading with Tanzania at a broader scale, South Africa is actually the second largest market for Tanzania in the world. Not necessarily in Africa, in the world. And of course, if you had to put that into the context of the overall country's, point of view. But then when you had to move towards the agricultural products, then you realize that we are not as equipped in terms of, equal. And then there's a numbers of that. You can never be able to compare Tanzania in terms of the agricultural sector to South Africa. It is very small, insignificant. But with that, still, South Africa does buy or at least the most products that Tanzania does sell. So that's why this came as a surprise, because for us, we are like, no, what? We don't really understand how this is coming about, because there's no justification in any form of, us restricting them to supply. Because, of course, the product, for instance, the banana that they want to supply to South Africa, we are buying a lot of that outside. So therefore, meaning we have the market for them to supply South Africa with the product. Just that there's just seems to be some misunderstanding somewhere between the two states, and this is something that could easily be discussed and addressed as countries that are trading within the same bloc, which is, for instance, at the SADC at this stage, one bloc that should be addressing this thing at a national level.
So is there a lumping together of Malawi and South Africa in this case, or is it just coincidental that the action happens in tandem because there is this existing disagreement with both countries? And as you mentioned, with Malawi, it's far more several products, and Tanzania has gone as far as saying that it will ban the transit of these agricultural products on its territory or to Tanzania.
Yeah. And that's even actually said, because, for instance, as I was saying earlier on, that this looks to be a misunderstanding with these two countries, because it happened before. If I may make an example about the avocados that Tanzania wanted to supply South Africa. When that happened, it was also, again, an issue that was not really handled accordingly by both nations, if I may put it that way. Because, for instance, if I will just make an example again, is that between a specific period, which is from October to January of every year, South Africa doesn't have enough supplies of avocados into South Africa, because our season it ends somewhere just around September, before October, and then therefore we rely solely on the products that we get outside. And Tanzania is one of those countries that we have increasingly became dependent of them, and therefore there was no need for South Africa to restrict products for no reason. And it is the case for the bananas. I'm saying that we are buying around 200,000 tons of banana as of last year, and therefore there's a market for it. I think then the issue is that we just really need to get to talk to about these things, because the reality is that South Africa, there is no reason. Actually, there's no proof that South Africa is really saying that we don't want bananas or any product from Tanzania because we have been trading with them. In fact, some of their products are coming to South Africa without any issues.
That may be the case, but obviously diplomacy has failed badly in this case. If Tanzania is of the impression that there is a one-sided ban, I don't see why. And Tanzania has said that it has not closed any open communication channels, so it is still open to talk. Yeah. But it almost makes Tanzania sound crazy if we say, this is out of the blue. Something somewhere must have happened for the Tanzanian Agricultural Ministry to respond in the manner that it did. Either a bad word, a bad conversation, a bad, phrase in the text of whatever the trade agreement is.
that's a thing. I think somehow, as much as things do get out of control somehow, one way or the other. But I think for this instance, the discussions or talks somehow. In fact, if there was anything, perhaps the minister could have been much placed better in a way of pointing to that problem and to say, we have done this and we have spoke to one or two people, but he has not gone anywhere. Then from there, we were going to be in a position to be able to say, look, based on what the minister is providing, then South Africa has failed on this instance. For now, it has not been. Because, for instance, if you are to look specifically even to the agricultural products, as I was telling you earlier on, there are some products that about 95% of their market is South Africa. They are from Tanzania. We have never had issues with them because there's really no problem there. And those products are coming to South Africa. In fact, for instance, some of the macadamia nuts and other nuts that are coming to this country, we're producing way much larger than the Tanzanians as a South Africa as a country, and we're exporting outside. So therefore, if we had to have beef with them in any form, one way or the other, this should not be really something that should have went as far as it gone like now. For instance, that's why I was saying that it looks like perhaps the issue could have been addressed differently or separately from what appears to be Malawi has triggered all these decisions, because for South Africa, we really don't see how it has come to what it is today.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here and again say on the part of Malawi, surely the responsibility does not lie solely with them to point out what the problem is. If South Africa is exercising its diplomatic rights, and especially if it's committed to the AFCFTA, it would have said, given the current volatile environment, diplomatic volatile, environment with these reciprocal trade wars, spats that it is experiencing, it surely would have been proactive enough to say there's a sense of some disquiet from you, Tanzania. Yeah. What can we do to help?
Tsepiso, this happens across the world. It's not something new between South Africa, Tanzania, or any country within the continent of Africa or elsewhere. So the reality is this. I'm going to make an example specifically about South Africa. South Africa is one of the, in fact, in Africa, there's only South Africa that is in the top 35 countries exporting products in the world. So the other countries, they're very small compared to that, including Tanzania. So therefore, we understand the importance of countries wanting to expand their trade and get and benefit from the revenues that they generate from that. So I don't see why South Africa would be sort of defensive in terms of allowing, or at least allowing especially countries that are within the continent, because there's one thing that we believe in is that it's going to benefit South Africa, and South Africa is already Africa is already the largest market for South Africa, and therefore we have no need, or at least there's no reason that we would want to distort trade, because that's what we are pushing for to the continent of Africa. So there's no reason there. Now, it took South Africa a couple of years. For instance, there's a period where we took some 20 years, 15 years to 10 years to negotiate for one product from South Africa to get to be sent maybe to Middle East. The likes of the beef, for instance, that we recently, as of last year, managed to be able to be allowed by Saudi Arabia to send beef from South Africa there. It took 10 years to send grapes to Philippines. It took 16 years to take apples to Thailand. So this is not something that is unique to any country. It happens. Countries do focus on specific products.
I hear what you're saying, and it's such a pity that we've run out of time, because I wanted to say, for me, the point is not the fact that the situation is not unique, but it's about being proactive, particularly if we believe in, the goal of bigger and stronger intra-Africa trade. But thank you so much, Thabile Nkunjana, a senior agricultural economist with the National Agricultural Marketing Council's Trade Research. We're going to leave it here for now. 24 minutes past 9. We're back again with more news.
Get ready to plug into knowledge with Channel Africa Conversations.
South Africa is stepping boldly into a new era of industrial innovation.
This week on Channel Africa Conversations, Peter talks energy. From renewables to policy shifting, innovations to inventions, and how it all connects to Africa's future.
Surely we can use batteries and battery minerals to transform Africa from an extractive economy to a manufacturing economy.
Do you want to stay ahead of the energy curve? Then don't miss our brand new podcast episode, dropping on Thursday, 24th of April on SABC Plus and on YouTube. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
Tsepiso Makwetla winds it down on Africa World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
And it is 25 minutes past 9. We speak about this. Tesla boss Elon Musk, he's pledged to significantly cut back his side, or rather his role in the US government after the electric car firm reported a huge drop in profit and sales for the start of the year. Musk has led the newly created advisory body, the Department for Government Efficiency, since last year, putting the world's richest man at the heart of the cutting of US spending and jobs, as the South African-born billionaire has been influencing the trajectory of the United States. It seems a good time now to remember another South African who also tried to shape the national conversation, albeit not as successfully. For more on this, we're joined by Nick Dull, Cape Town-based freelance journalist and author of 3 books about South African history. Nick, a very good evening to you, and thank you so much for honoring the invitation. I really am grateful. It's because I was so intrigued when I saw the article that you wrote for Al Jazeera that spoke about another emperor who declared himself emperor of the United States and who was South Africa. So tell us exactly what happened in 1859, is it?
Yes, indeed. Thanks for having me, Tsepiso. I always enjoy chatting about this kind of thing. I've known about Emperor Norton, Emperor Joshua Norton, for a while, but I've been waiting for the right opportunity to write about him, and Elon Musk presented it. So, in a nutshell, he was born in England in 1818. But when he was 2 years old, his family came to South Africa as part of the group known as the 1820 settlers, quite a well-known group. And he grew up as a youngster in South Africa. His dad was a merchant and a farmer, and they were not particularly well off. Nothing like Elon Musk's upbringing. And in his 20s, Joshua Norton sort of headed around the world seeking his fortune. He spent some time in England, some time in Brazil. And then in the California gold rush, he pitched up in San Francisco. So that was in the 1850s, I think he arrived. And he did suddenly sort of start getting some traction with his businesses. He set himself up as a merchant. You know, the miners needed lots of stuff. And soon he became one of the richer people in San Francisco. And everything was going well. And then that all changed one day when there was a famine in China that led to a rice shortage. So he had the clever idea of importing a shipment of rice from Peru. The only problem was that the rest of San Francisco had the same idea, and the rice that he bought from Peru was of inferior quality. And suddenly, as a result of this deal gone wrong, he basically lost everything he owned. It seems like he was plunged into depression for a bit after this, but then he pulled his socks up and he walked into the newspaper offices in 1859 and handed them a note saying that politics in America was going horribly wrong, and he declared himself emperor of the United States.
So, Nick, let me jump in here and say, can you just explain a little bit more? You've drawn the similarities or the parallels with Elon Musk. Was it an ego trip, as some have accused Elon Musk of, or were the similarities far more significant or actually completely divergent? Because Joshua Norton here, you say he fought for the rights of immigrants, women, and those who suffered under religious persecution. Not quite the Elon Musk that we're talking about.
Yeah, I know. The similarities are that they both have a South African upbringing and that they tried to shape the US conversation, but the differences are also huge. So the two main differences are, one, Elon Musk has major influence. As Trump's sort of best buddy, he, like it or not, he does have a lot of influence. Joshua Norton, he's a great guy. He's well remembered in San Francisco. He's like a cult figure, but he never had any influence. He was, in essence, a neighborhood eccentric. But the people of San Francisco loved him, and so did the newspaper editors, because in his 20-year reign, and I use the term reign in inverted commas, he issued something like 400 proclamations, which were all published free of charge in the newspapers, just because he was such a, I don't know, he was a breath of fresh air. He never, no one ever fell out with him. He just kind of made these so-called proclamations. Nobody really listened to them, but he was, as you've said, well ahead of his time on human rights issues. He supported, black people being allowed to ride on public streetcars at a time when slavery was, one of the hot issues of the day. He was very much in favor of women's rights. The Chinese were the sort of Mexican immigrants of the day, and he was very supportive of their rights. So, that's the other big difference between him and Elon Musk. So,
another interesting fact is that both Norton and Musk grew up enjoying the political privileges of white South Africans under British rule and under apartheid rule. So I want to talk about how this could have possibly shaped two very different men, but also seeing the outcome being that both become quite popular in the United States, because like it or not, Elon Musk does enjoy a great deal of support in the United States.
He does. I think the reason that this South Africa shaped these two very different men is just look around. South Africa is a fascinating place, and it can shape people in very different ways. So it's hard to know why Norton was so forward-thinking and such just basically a kind person who thought about his fellow man as an equal, even when he'd lost everything. He was a pauper. He basically walked around the streets of San Francisco issuing so-called taxes as the emperor, which were basically just asking people to give him a donation so he could pay for his bed at night in a boarding house. So I think the reason he became popular was just that he was such a likable character. He was eccentric. He was definitely weird, but he didn't make enemies. And everyone just sort of, you can imagine a neighborhood eccentric being humored for a year or two and then kind of falling off the radar. But this guy was loved for 20 years. Then his funeral was a huge affair. It was paid for by the Businessmen's Association of San Francisco, and there were something like 10,000 people. And now, 150 years after his death, he's still remembered very fondly. There are at least 3 organizations that sort of have him as their sort of patron saint, if you will. So I don't know if the same's going to happen for Musk. He's super popular now, but is he still going to be in 150 years?
And Nick, that's actually where I was going. You see with Norton, as you say, unfortunately he had a fall from grace, but he went to all the right places, stayed at the right hotels. As you say, he was a cult figure who's remembered not only in literature, music and film, but he also had ambitions of running for Congress as an independent candidate. And when you look at the very impactful role and influential role that Elon Musk and his ideas play in what's shaping not only the Trump administration, you even have memes that suggest that he's the de facto president, he's the de facto White House, occupant. can we make the comparison, and what maybe if we look at how America has changed, and if it's changed at all, particularly in terms of the political system. America is known as the land of milk and honey, where you can grab of any opportunity. Is that same America now? And do you think that Elon Musk has those political ambitions?
So, there are similarities between the time when Norton came to power. Not came to power, when he declared himself emperor. It was just before the Civil War, so there was huge turmoil. And the Republicans and the Democrats couldn't agree. The Republicans were actually... it was the Republicans and the Unionists, and they couldn't agree on issues such as slavery. And now we've got the same sort of partisan division. And Norton was very vehement that being an independent candidate was the best way. He didn't like either party. He wanted his own ideas. But that idea never got off the ground. Musk, he's aligned himself with the Republicans, but I think, and he swung very much in their direction recently. But I think he can't be president because he's not born in America, unless they change the Constitution. So I don't know how much further his political ambitions can go. To me, the impression I get with Musk is that the reason he's got that power is that he's the richest man in the world.
And do you say finally that one thing Musk has in common with the emperor is his knack for reimagining the world we live in? In a quick sentence, can you just explain that to us and what that means for the future, not only for Elon Musk, but for us, the South Africans who, share his heritage?
Yeah, so, Elon Musk's famous for wanting to colonize Mars. And Joshua Norton was actually the guy who popularized the idea of building a bridge across San Francisco Bay. Not the most famous one, the Golden Gate Bridge, but the other one that's, I think, more important to the city of San Francisco, the Bay Bridge, was actually Joshua Norton's idea. They were both definitely prepared to think out the box. We can say that. But if I were going to draw a comparison between Elon Musk and a South African figure, I would go with Cecil Rhodes ahead of Joshua Norton.
Nick, such a pleasure speaking to you. I really appreciate you taking the time. Much appreciated. Nick Dahl is a freelance journalist and author based in Cape Town. He's written a very interesting article. If you want to see it, it's a feature on aljazeera.com. And he's basically talking about the first South African that declared himself emperor in the United States. And as you've heard in our conversation, he gives his history and he makes those comparisons. This brings the times to 22 minutes to 10.
We are on Open Views Audio Bouquet. Channel 628. Africa, meet Abedi.
Yeah, that's me.
Abedi is a music lover through and through.
I really love African music.
He's got a taste for all kinds of tunes and spends his days listening to Channel Africa. Guess what? He didn't know.
Okay.
Africa wants to help Abedi and all music lovers everywhere to discover even more incredible music. That is why Channel Africa is calling on all African musicians to submit their music. Musicians, remember to give us all your relevant information. Make your submissions at music@channelafrica.co.za. Submissions are your chance to be heard on radio. But sadly, they do not guarantee that you'll be playlisted. All submissions will be carefully reviewed to see if they meet our station's requirement. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
And Africa World Hour continues with the stories that are on the radar and those off your radar. So please let us know what's happening in your world so we can also add the stories that you find of interest onto the lineup and unpack them. So we talk about, this time, traditional medicines. The Director General of Nigerian Natural Medicine Development Agency, Professor Martins Emeje, says the country could become a net exporter of traditional medicines within 12 months. He was speaking during a working visit by the House of Representatives Committee on Legislative Compliance to the agency's headquarters in Lagos. And for more on this, Professor Emeje joins us. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you, and good evening from Nigeria.
We know that
it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much for taking the time. We know that Nigeria is blessed with a huge population of very many different ethnic groupings who also have myriad indigenous knowledge systems, and we've seen their use of that, particularly within the traditional medicine sector. Tell us, what is the idea around this, becoming a net exporter of traditional medicines? How would you package this?
Okay, so thank you, and again, thank you for inviting me to your program today. Nigeria is a country of at least 230 million people, and like you rightly said, so many ethnic groups, at least 250 different ethnic groups, and we are people of different culture. Before the advent of colonialism, the people of Nigeria, which is typically a representation of what Africa is, have lived on their own and healed themselves of different ailments and diseases that bedeviled them. So, and these cultural method of taking care of the diseases and ailments in our environment, which we have lived with and used effectively, resulting in our people having long life expectancy of people living over 100 years, have unfortunately turned around today, with people living with an average expectancy, life expectancy of less than 60 years at this time. So what we are doing at the moment is to try to renew the hope of our people in this lost glory of our forebears over the years, by going back to our roots. Mm-hmm. To harnessing the natural biodiversity of the country. The country is home to over 10,000 different species of plant biodiversity. Not to talk about the plants, the animals, the soil, or the marine life. But if you take the plant biodiversity alone, which is the largest component of natural medicine, we are talking of plant species of over 10,000. And this is like virgin area yet untapped for development of natural medicines in different ramifications for use. So at this point, the Nigerian Natural Medicine Development Agency, which is the federal government of Nigeria's parastatal, mandated by the law, the Nigerian Parliament, is designed to ensure that these natural endowment is researched into, properly harnessed, documented, preserved, and conserved in a way that they become more durable, they become more available.
Okay.
Yes, they are stable, effective, safe,
all right,
and
Professor Emeje,
attractive.
Allow me to jump in and ask
people.
about the regulatory elements of this, including the staffing. I mean, you talk about deploying about 20 of your 15,000 staff to each local government. How is that going to work?
Yes.
What will be the ultimate goal?
Yeah, okay. No, now, I was driving there, but let's look at it this way. that one of the beauties of natural medicine is that there is no magic bullet. The idea that a biomolecule obtained from whatever source should be useful for every human being anywhere in the world is unreasonable. And that is how the world has lived up to the moment. And unfortunately, this idea, which is a foreign idea to our continent of Africa, is what has driven the pharmaceutical market up to the moment. By the way, I'm a pharmacist, a Western trained pharmacist. So now, if you look at the current idea of treatment, even in allopathic medicine, we are talking of individualized medicine. The world is now talking of chronotherapy, where the treatment for a patient is individualized. The drug you give to a particular patient, even for the same diseases, may not be useful in another patient. And that is what natural medicine has been from the time immemorial, thousands of years before the advent of allopathic medicine. So we are going there for so the idea we are pushing across and the project we are doing at the moment is we are going back to our rural communities to identify the diseases that are prevalent in such communities. Because for every community, there are some prevalent diseases. And the diseases of a particular community might not be the same as the diseases of the adjacent or next neighbor community. Now, if you also look around that community, the solution to that disease is also found in that community. That is the beauty of that is what nature has done.
Prof,
nature has done it in a way that the solution to every disease in a community is in that community. But the scientists are so proud of themselves that instead of calming down, humbling themselves to study this, we are working with our shoulder side thinking that we have the solution to nature.
Prof, I'm going to ask that you and I schedule another conversation because unfortunately we have run out of time, and I think it's a very important discussion, particularly as you say the end goal is to reduce and in fact obliterate the dependence on foreign and important medicines, but also to create jobs. Professor Martins Emeja, Director General of Nigeria Natural Medicines Development Agency, thank you very much, and I hope to speak to you about this soon in a more comprehensive way. I really appreciate you taking the time and speaking to us. Very interesting subject. It is now 23 minutes to 10. You're listening to Africa World Hour.
Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
Indeed, that's what we do here on Africa World Hour. And this time, our next conversation is about a webinar series titled Sexual and Reproductive Health Justice Series. It's aimed at fostering a space for exchanging experiences, legal strategies, and advocacy approaches that have proven effective in different regions of the global south. Today, the series held another leg of its discourse called South to South Dialogue, Lessons and Strategies from the Global South on Sexual and Reproductive Health Rights. It was a discussion on how strategic litigation has emerged as a critical tool in the safeguarding and expanding of sexual and reproductive health rights, enabling courts to hold governments accountable, influence public policy, and ensure legal protections for those most affected by restrictive laws and policies. It's a mouthful, isn't it? So to talk more about this engagement is host of the series, Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to health for the UN Secretary General. A very good evening to you, Dr. T, as you're well known, and I appreciate you taking the time. I don't know how you find hours in the day to do what you do.
Oh gosh, no, that's a good question. And the day I find out, I'll stop. So for now, I think we're all grateful that we can do this work together.
No, we're certainly grateful because it's such an important conversation, especially as we see there's a push in the United States to start criminalizing sexual and reproductive health rights. So give me a key takeaways from the discussion, the dialogue that you had today.
So one of the important conversations was having judges from Mexico and Kenya explore different ways in which jurisprudence is used to protect sexual and reproductive health rights, but also exploring limitations to strategic litigation and also sharing the different ways that both justices, one, of course, from Kenya, who's the president of the women's chapter in Kenya, and the one in Mexico, see and view international instruments and the ways in which they are important to safeguard these rights. And I think from the two civil society participants we have an appreciation of how difficult and how lengthy strategic litigation is, and some of the issues, of course, are quite urgent, right? And so the question was, how do we enforce and ensure that the court's decisions are actually effectively enforced to protect sexual and reproductive health rights?
And there are obviously common challenges faced by countries in the global south. And as you say, you're talking about strategic litigation, and some of which would then be that which would be aimed at countries in the global north because they would be responsible perhaps for the conditions or the inhibitions that face this particular problem. Are you able to just give us a brief overview of this?
Yeah, some of the issues that we see, of course, are the political context, right, in which these rights have to be realized, in which they live. Many countries around the world are currently grappling with the fact that many of the elected leaders and duty bearers are people who are not necessarily human rights defenders. And we see that the autonomy, the sense of freedom, and the ability to make choices around one's sexual and reproductive health in terms of its care, its timing, and the options available is becoming contested. And the courts are being used more and more as that space of contestation in a way that we haven't seen before. You know, courts have previously been used to protect rights, to promote the realization of the right to health. And yet we see as an emerging context politically in the contemporary world we live in now, where the courts are being used to take away rights. And so by the same strength, in the same spirit, we are using the courts, therefore, to protect rights, to advance rights. And I think what often people call we need to push back against the narrative of anti-human rights, I call that pushing forward and past it. Because if we just focus on pushing back, we are only just reacting to the narrative of what those people said, as opposed to setting our own particular agenda, which is a very different kind of agenda, which is human rights based.
When you talk about health justice, and I'm glad that you're talking about even the phrase push back, because the multilateral space has even become constricted in holding governments and agencies to account on the lack of health justice, isn't it? I mean, you obviously have been in the news fighting for the rights of those who are in conflict, but we're talking even about something as simple as access to healthcare, quality healthcare, not even family planning, as some would think of as a luxury because it's completely against their own personal moral code.
And one thing I always come back to is the fact that when you deny someone's autonomy, when you deny someone's access to what often is life-saving interventions, you are violating their human rights. And not just only their right to health, but we know that when you are healthy, both physically and mentally, you are able to access your economic rights in terms of participation in the economy, in the labor market. You are able to stay in school as an adolescent young girl. You are able to realize your right to education, but also your right to sports and cultural expression as well. So the right to health is an inclusive right in that it enables many other human rights to be realized. And so in the context of what we term just normal everyday life, we find that the attacks are becoming even more pronounced. But you are correct. Even in the context of humanitarian crisis, in the context of protracted war and conflict, in the context of genocide. We know that sexual and reproductive health rights are usually the first to be violated. We know that the service is often the first to be limited. And so it's very important, therefore, to always keep in mind and be intersectional in how we approach what seems just to be an everyday issue of family planning, abortion rights, access to a broad range of, for example, affirming gender health care. A lot of these issues for many people are urgent and timeless and cannot wait.
I know a lot of your diary is made up literally from going airport to airport, country to country, as the UN Secretary General's rapporteur on the right to health, special rapporteur on the right to health. What is your sense from the on-the-ground research and information that you get about how rapidly are restrictive laws and policies growing, not only in the global north, but we're seeing it on the African continent?
Absolutely. And so it's not even a new phenomenon, I suppose, but it's something about the fact that what used to be a shameful state of opinion is now something that people hold quite proudly and quite eminently. So, for example, it's not new, right, that you have international NGOs and other governments from what we call the global north influencing directly governments and political leaders in the global south to be anti-human rights and to actually use their political influence to pass regressive laws, even when those countries themselves may have constitutions that are quite progressive. And we've seen this in the east and west of the Africa continent as well. What you then see also emerging now, though, in the global north, is that you have the political leaders in those particular countries, in Europe as well as in the Americas, who are themselves now quite taking on voluntarily, right, what we used to call and what I used to term domestic policy, foreign policy that used to advance into human rights, making that domestic policy. And you see that in the U.S. So, by extension, if you look at the global gag rule and what it has been enforcing around the world, what the current administration in the U.S., for example, has turned that into a domestic policy, where now the people in the U.S. are feeling what used to be a foreign policy on a domestic level. And that's something that's very different. And so the kind of organizing, the kind of learning, the kind of response that the human rights networks, support, and community in what used to be called the global north, very, very different. They're challenged in a very different way because some of them were not quite aware and nuanced in how to actually respond to anti-human rights because it was always outward-facing as foreign policy.
And when you talk about enabling the courts to hold governments to account, in this case, and it's very interesting as I'm listening to you talk about what used to be foreign policy now becoming a domestic policy, what we're seeing with the aid cuts now, and one dare say they're actually creeping on human rights of individuals who ordinarily would not be entangled in such situation. We're talking about the funding cuts, but more importantly, the fact that the judiciary in some countries is not even at a level at which it could deal with some of these complex issues because either it's in an authoritarian environment or there simply is no room to express the fact that your rights are being violated.
Absolutely correct. For strategic litigation to work, there is a context that is fertile for it to be able to be a reality. And one of them is the independence of judiciaries. And we know in many countries around the world, more and more political leaders are putting more and more justices in positions where they're able to be influenced directly by political will so that they can therefore bring about particular outcomes through the courts. One such example of a judicial process, let me put it that way, is the Supreme Court of the United States when it was reviewing the Roe v. Wade court case that took away abortion rights in the U.S. That was, of course, shocking and surprising, But for many of us who work in the space, we're not completely surprised. Shocked, yes, that actually the courts did reverse what we know are human rights. And that's just one example. And it takes decades to undo that. But what also happens is that many courts use each other's jurisprudence to then advance or at least explain particular decisions that they are themselves taking in different parts of the world. And why the webinar was important is that we were arguing that a South-to-South dialogue is important because we can share strategies in a way that is often seen as if we are the ones to learn from the global North.
All right.
And so we had justices from Mexico and a judge from Kenya actually taking us through very progressive ways in which they are interpreting their own laws, very honest in the limitations they have, but how much they are able to be agile and creative in how they use the law.
Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng, I am saddened that we have to end it here, but much appreciated for your time. Really do. Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng is the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to health and brings us to the end of Africa World Hour. Quick one with Shayla. What's happening on Hotlines tonight?
So we talk all things finances. And what I found really interesting is that if you as a parent take that gift that you wanted to buy your child, partly invest it, in 18 years time from now, you could potentially have a millionaire on your hands. And that's a conversation that comes up.
Breadwinner, mama.
Exactly that.
All right, that's where we're going to leave it. It's exactly 10 o'clock. That's it from the Africa World Hour team. Do enjoy the rest of you listening here. Good night.
Are you fluent in French, Chinyanja, Portuguese, and Kiswahili? Are you passionate about radio? And are you looking to work in South Africa? Do you have papers that qualify you to work in South Africa? In that case, we might have an opportunity for you to work for Channel Africa. Send us your CV and demo at newsroom@channelafrica.co.za. Remember, if you don't hear from us within 14 days, it means you have not made it or you have not been selected. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Hotlines bring you fresh perspectives about love after dark. Channel Africa, where every moment is an African celebration. Feel the energy, feel the connection. Channel Africa, the African perspective.